Sujit. Welcome to my channel Sujit Academy. Today I am going to define what poetry is. Guys, students of English learners have often faced problem to understand what poetry is, and I thought that it is better to explain them through a video. So welcome to my channel and let's start now. First we will try to have a definition, a perfect understanding of poetry. The first thing must be clear to your mind that actually there is not any single perfect definition of poetry. There are 1,001 definitions of poetry, and most of them are often confusing and contradictory to each other. And when we try to understand some of the definitions, then they give us more confusion than clarifications. First, let's see some of the examples of the poetry given by some of the great poets of their time. For example, we take Coleridge, S.T. Coleridge, who was a great poet, a great romantic poet too. And he defined that poetry is the best words presented or expressed in a best order. And when we talk about his friend, that is William Wordsworth, he was also a great romantic poet. And he tried to define poetry as that poetry is emotion expressed in tranquility. Now let's see. Carlyle, who said that poetry is the musical thought. Mercier, he also tried to define poetry. So thus we find that a number of poets have tried their best to define what poetry is, but none of them is considered to be the perfect definition of poetry. But yes, after studying these poets' definitions, then we can at least be able to understand what poetry is. Although we will not be able to define poetry, but we can at least be able to understand poetry. So first try to understand what are the basic elements of poetry. The first thing is that poetry has to do something with our spirit, with our heart, with our emotion, with our feelings. Poetry has nothing to do with intelligence, with our wisdom. It is related to our heart. Means we can say poetry is a subject matter of heart, not of our mind. The great poets thought with their heart, not with their mind. And that's why they have been able to compose great poems. And now let us see, the second thing is that when we try to understand poetry, then we must understand poetry is the greatest genre of English literature. We have genre of literature like poetry, drama, novels, short stories. But the best of them is poetry. If we go to the classical age, we find that most of the great things were written in poetry also. Our Ramayana has been written in poetry, the Mahabharata has been written in poetry, and even the great parts of the Bible and the Quran have also been written in poetry. And poetry, we can say, is the expression of our imagination. Further, when we try to understand poetry better, then we must have a comparison between poetry and science. First, try to understand what science is. Science just try to find out the truth. It has nothing to do with the feelings or the hearts. If we give a piece of rose to a scientist, what will he do? He will never try to appreciate the beauty of the rose. He will just try to he will pluck the rose, break into pieces, and then try to understand how it has got the fragrance, what kind of flower it is, what are the things that help the rose to grow up, what kinds of minerals it has got from the earth, and how it undergoes the photosynthesis, how it absorbs water, how he gets air, oxygen, carbon dioxide from environment, and that's it. But if we see the rose with the eyes of the poet, he will touch the rose softly with love. First, it will be very heartbreaking for him to even pluck the rose. He will just look at it and appreciate the beauty of the rose. He will try to form poems on the rose. He will think with his heart. And he will compose poetry. He just try to see the truth behind that. Means with what expression, with what feelings, with what intention, with what purpose God has created this rose. That is his subject matter. So I think that you can now be able to understand what is the difference between poetry and science. So poetry is emotion, it is imagination, it is related to our heart. A person with the mind can never be able to understand to poetry, never be understand the definition of poetry. But a person with the heart, when you listen to a music, what happens? What happens? You just start dance. Nobody has told you to dance, but you just start to dance. Your legs begin to move in a perfect rhythm, with the matching with the rhyme and rhythm of the poetry or the songs also. Okay, so that's what poetry is. When we move to the further section of poetry, then poetry can be divided into two sections: subjective poetry and objective poetry. To understand the difference here, subjective poetry means a poetry that has been written by the poet when he has gone through his own experience, his own feelings. He has felt it, he has touched it, he has seen it. Means poetry means subjective poetry is the exposition of his own feelings, his own hearts. He just had either enjoyed it or he had just cried. That is the main thing about his subjective poetry. And when we talk about objective poetry, means the poet has seen it, means something is happening outside of the poet. He has just expressed what he has seen. So subjective poetry, when the poet suffers himself, and he just wants to give us a touch what he feels. But objective poetry, supposing the soldier has gone to fight a battle, and then he has seen it, how the people are being killed, and that's when he writes the poetry, then it means that he is suffering from the subjective poetry. It is not objective. But when we are not involved in the war, we have just heard it, and then we started writing about the poetry, then it is objective poetry. I think guys, you have understood poetry. Further we go that there are different kinds of poetry: ballads, epic, elegy, sonnets, lyrics, and we will talk about later all these things. And I think that if you have any confusion about that, then you must pass comments on that. Thank you. Sharanara.